let me say there are 3 short talks, and in between the short talks there is a little bit of music. It's the women's marching song, the song that they marched to when they paraded, particularly around the London area during the time of the suffragette movement. And I've handed a few slips out to give you the actual words, because you can't hear the words terribly well, but you'll just get a bit of the music in between each talk. If you want to leave or anyone wants to arrive, that's a good moment to slip away. There are 3 things. The whole thing should finish in about half an hour. Right? Thank you. There was a major benefit of the 1914-1918 World War, with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of able-bodied men being called up to serve in the army. Women were called upon to do a very large number of varied jobs, previously done only by men. And the women showed that they could do all these varied jobs equally as well as men. This revelation played a major part at the end of the war in 1918 in Parliament granting all women of 30 years of age or over who were property owners with the right to a vote. So in the general election of December 1918, there were 17 women, including such well-known suffragettes as Mrs. Pethwick Lawrence and Christabel Pankhurst, the daughter of Emmeline Pankhurst, who stood as candidates. All were defeated, although Christabel Pankhurst came within 777 votes of victory. It is true, of course, that a Constance Gore Booth did win an election in Ireland, but she was a member of Sinn Féin, and so disqualified herself, because as a member of Sinn Féin, she refused to take the oath of allegiance required to sit in Parliament. Some months later, there was a death that few, if any, realised might lead to the election of a woman Member of Parliament. William Walderforth, the first Viscount Astor, died. His death meant that his son, the newly re-elected Member of Parliament for Sutton Plymouth, the husband of the American-born Nancy Astor, would now have to give up his seat in the House of Commons to take his father's place in the House of Lords. And the son had no wish to do so. He looked for ways in which he could retain his seat in the House of Commons. But no way was possible to him. He would have to give up being the Member of Parliament for Sutton Plymouth. Who was going to replace him? Not surprisingly, the Conservative Party in Plymouth selected his wife, Nancy Astor, as their candidate at the forthcoming by-election. Nancy Astor had well supported her husband over the 9 years he had been a Member of Parliament for Sutton Plymouth. She was widely respected in Plymouth. Her extreme wealth, for which she never apologised, did not lessen her natural charm, nor did it adversely affect the easy, friendly way she had of meeting and talking with all sorts and classes of people. Even her standing as a Conservative was not a hindrance. In one of her early speeches, she explained, "If you want a party hack, don't elect me. Surely we have outgrown party ties. I have. The war has taught us that there is a greater thing than parties, and that's the state." She was a woman of endless energy and she threw herself into the election campaigning of speaking at large, well-organised meetings and wandering into the roughest and poorest districts of Plymouth to meet and talk with people. She thrived on hecklers who interrupted her, and she gave back as much as she was given. On one occasion, she responded to the question, "Could you live on £2 a week?" with the answer, "No. And if you had my money, would you do all the work that I do?" On another occasion, she asked a driver of a petrol lorry if he was going to vote for her. But then she saw that he was smoking and added, "If you don't stop smoking, you won't be voting for anyone." Polling day came on the 15th of November, but the count had to be delayed because the votes of men serving overseas had to be brought to Plymouth. Then on Saturday, 28th of November in the year 1919, the town clerk announced to the waiting crowd that Nancy Astor had polled the most votes, with an overall majority over her two opponents of 5,000 votes. Great Britain had elected its first woman member of Parliament, the American-born Nancy Astor. To be an effective member of Parliament was to be a much greater challenge than to win an election. As the only woman among 700 men, where the rules and traditions had long been established, Nancy Astor had to be her own individual self, and also a kind of symbol of all women. No easy task to have to fulfill. Yet she made her presence felt and was constantly seeking to interrupt the speeches of her male members. She chose her topics of concern carefully so that they reflected the concerns of all women. In her maiden speech, she championed the call to have the state control the sale of alcohol, especially the age when young people could buy. Nancy Astor remained the only woman member of Parliament for nearly 2 years. Then in the October of 1921, she was joined by a Mrs. Wintringham, who had won a by-election following the death of its previous Member of Parliament, her husband. 2 years later, there was a general election when 8 women were elected members of Parliament. They did not all like Nancy, but they did all appreciate the welcome and the support that she gave to them. Nancy Astor continued to be a member of Parliament for over 20 years, when at the general election of 1944, she was not rechosen by her own local Conservative Party, much of course to her own displeasure. She remained socially very active in Plymouth, and the people of that city recognised her work in 1959 when she was made a freeman of the city of Plymouth. She died peacefully at the age of 85 years in 1964. I hope the music plays now. although there's nothing really new in what I have to say. It was on the 2nd of October in the year 1954 that James Tutor Eade, the Home Secretary in Clement Attlee's post-war Labour government, made a visit to Mansfield. He was here to officially open the new junior school that had been built on Harrop White Road. He named it the Ethel Wainwright School and said of her, "The name of this school will perpetuate the name of one of the greatest exponents of higher education this country has ever had, and it is fitting that this tribute should be paid in her lifetime." Praise indeed. Who then was this Ethel Wainwright? She lived originally in the Manchester area, where her father was employed as a railway station master, and she came to Mansfield in 1900 to marry Albert John Wainwright, who was also employed as a railway worker. Ethel was a strong supporter of the suffragette movement and is registered as a member and the press secretary of the branch of the Suffrage Society that had been formed in Mansfield in 1893. In 1915, she became widely known and respected as an active member of the Borough Food Committee, responsible for the relief work in the town of Mansfield during the 1914-1918 war years. A woman of great determination, she was selected in 1920 by the local Labour Party as their candidate in the North Ward of Mansfield to serve as their representative on the Mansfield District Council. She was duly elected, and so in 1920 she became the first woman Mansfield Borough Council. 1920. That was to be the beginning of a series of firsts recognising Ethel Wainwright's work in the town over the next 20 years or so. 4 years later, by 1924, she had won the confidence of so many of the people of Mansfield that she was appointed the very first woman magistrate of the town. Then, in 1927, she was elected the first woman chairman of the local education committee at Mansfield, in recognition of her interest and pioneering work for the welfare of children. A year after that, her male colleagues on the Mansfield Borough Council made her the first woman alderman of the town. And a year after that, in 1929, she was appointed the first woman mayor of the borough. She chose her only daughter, Dorothy, a school teacher at Brunt School, as her escort. Her dreams of providing suitable education for frail children was realised in the early 1930s when an open-air school was built up Berry Hill. In her opening speech at the new school, she said, "No system of education can be complete unless it cares for all children, and particularly for those who are less fortunate. And mental development can only take place when the physical well-being is cared for." The open-air school is no longer in existence, but for many years it served its purpose and was well spoken of. She also gave her active support in 1945 to the acquisition of the Nissen huts that had been left up Sutton Road from the American hospital site. They were needed to be used as a temporary technical school, following the raising of the school leaving age. So it must not have come as a great surprise to learn in 1946 that Ethel Wainwright had been awarded an OBE in the King's Birthday Honours List for her services to education. In that same year, 1946, she was invited to serve a second term as mayor of the town of Mansfield. Then in 1947, when domestic science departments and schools were closing down because of the shortage of teaching staff, Ethel resolved the local problem by encouraging 16 housewives to train as teachers to fill the vacancies. In that same year of 1947, Alderman German Abbott proposed, and the proposal was unanimously approved, that Ethel Wainwright should be made a freeman of the borough of Mansfield. She was the first woman to be so honoured in Mansfield. And I had it confirmed again this morning by our friend over here that as far as we know, the claim has been made that she was the very first woman to be honoured as a Freemason. So it's an honour to be honoured with the freedom of the borough for anyone else in the country, not just Mansfield. That's very significant. I'd read it, but I've had it confirmed this morning. And of course you can see the casket there that in actual fact commemorates Ethel Wainwright being granted the freeman, being made a freeman of the borough. No wonder Tutor Eade in 1954 spoke so highly of this Mansfield woman, Ethel Wainwright. Now for the third and final one of these three for this morning. Elizabeth Blackwell was born on the 3rd of February in the year 1821 at Counterslip near Bristol, where her father had a sugar refinery. During his working days, he usually wore a white suit, which for him stood for the clean, pure, white sugar produced by his refinery business. He was a kindly man who believed that daughters should be educated as well as sons. And in his studious daughter Elizabeth, he recognised an especial spark that to him meant she was going to achieve something. Unfortunately, when Elizabeth was only 11 years of age, his sugar refinery business went through a bad time. So he decided that they would go to America to live, and there he might find that his sugar refinery business would prosper there. Alas, it didn't. And a few years later, he died. And Elizabeth, with other members of the family, had to open a school to earn themselves a living. Then, when she was visiting a family friend who was seriously ill, this friend suggested to her that she, Elizabeth, should become a doctor, and made the point that many women who were ill would have liked to have been seen by a woman doctor. This brought back to Elizabeth memories of that terrible outbreak of cholera on the family voyage across the Atlantic. Elizabeth now had her life's work. She would become a doctor of medicine. The decision was easy. The making it happen was going to be much harder. Unfortunately, when she inquired about working in hospitals, she was always turned down because she was a woman. She applied to 18 medical schools to train as a doctor, but was always rejected, though at least one such medical school in Philadelphia is reported as offering her a place, provided she always attended dressed as a man. Eventually, after many rejections, she was accepted as a woman student at the Geneva Medical College in New York. Even there, when the male students received the news, they did not believe it. They thought, it's a practical joke that's being played upon us. And they were shocked when they saw that a woman entered the room. They were even more shocked to discover that she was dressed as a woman. They were even more shocked when they learned that she expected to study anatomy and to train as a surgeon. Yet, despite a lot of opposition to her presence, Elizabeth remained on course, won through, and in 1849 completed her studies and became the first woman to be registered in the United States of America as a qualified doctor of medicine. She then went on to Paris to study surgery. Unfortunately, there she suffered from an infection and lost sight of one of her eyes and had to give up the hopes of becoming a surgeon. By 1850, she was in London, but even with her qualifications and experience, many hospitals refused to allow her in, and many landlords refused her rented property for use as consulting rooms. Still, Elizabeth persisted and led the way for other women to follow her and become doctors. She opened a one-room dispensary in her own home for poor women and children, and with two other women doctors, one being her younger sister who had followed her into medicine, she opened an infirmary for women and children. Then back in America, the Blackwell sisters set up the Women's Central Association of Relief to train nurses for the American Civil War, and also set up a women's medical college with Elizabeth as Professor of Hygiene. She returned to live in Britain, first at Bristol and then in Hastings, where she spent the last 29 years of her life. There in her home, she set up in practice and wrote medical books. She established a National Health Society, which gave lectures and published leaflets on matters of health. She was always keen to remove the causes of illness, claiming that even better than curing ills is seeing that ills don't occur in the first place. She attended evening services at our Unitarian chapel on High Street in Hastings, having been influenced during her spells in America by eminent Unitarians, including people like Channing and the American thinker even of today, Ralph Waldo Emerson. She died in Hastings at the age of 89, and at her request, her body was buried at her favourite holiday spot, the village of Kilmun in Argyllshire in Scotland. Elizabeth Blackwell. Now, to this story there is a talk which will be appreciated by our friend over there. Women, long before Elizabeth Blackwell, of course, have always had an interest in medicine, always had an interest in practicing some kind of medical skill and receiving whatever training and education they could possibly obtain anywhere in the world. And some women went to rather extreme measures to gain any kind of training whatsoever. Notable, of course, and significant for us, was this woman, Scottish woman I believe, her name Miranda Stewart, who dressed as James Barry to gain access to medical training and served in the British Army as a man, medical man. Elizabeth Blackwell was, of course, the very first woman to train and practice and be registered both in America and in this country of Great Britain as the very first woman doctor who dressed and attended as a woman and obtained her qualifications as a woman, not as a woman dressed as a man. Thank you very much. Now for the last piece of music. They are here. Please collect one if you like, of Nancy Astor, Ethel Wainwright of Mansfield fame, and the first woman doctor, Elizabeth Blackwell. Can I also say that in October, and this is the effect of Maria on us, and so forth, has been very good. Maria says, what about what's happening today? So in October we're hoping to organise something whereby we shall have a number of women coming along to talk about what we've achieved over the last 100 years, and perhaps even more significant, what still needs to be done for women to gain complete freedom of equal choice. And so please, we'll let you know about that. We hope you'll come along and join us for our discussion, debate, or whatever it may be, sometime in October. Thank you very much indeed.